I'm Alex Rondinan, and welcome to If History is Any Guide, the political and current affairs program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. The following program is a short book review of Deepa Kumar's book Islamophobia and the Politics of Empire, published by Haymarket Books in 2012. For the last 15 years, the Islamophobia industry has, through hundreds of books and TV shows and quasi-policy reports, established a macro-narrative concerning Muslims and their place within human history and world politics. It's argued that the great historical challenge of our age is dealing with the barbaric, illiberal, and violent essence that operates within Islam, trying to overcome this problem so that Western enlightenment of freedom and peace can at long last spread to the peoples of the Muslim world. The only variation is between the neoconservative belief that all Muslims are savages and must be civilized by force or be killed, and the liberal conceptions of the good Muslim, bad Muslim dichotomy, where the good are treated as allies to isolate and target the bad. The Islamophobia narrative both operates as a macro whole, but also has several constituent elements, such as Muslims' hatred for democracy and obsession with using violence. Each individual element on its own is very powerful and dangerous, but when partnered together can become a form that seems unstoppable. This narrative, through the sheer volume of content that has been produced, has won for itself a dominant place in everyday life in countries all across the West. This has reached the point where most of the narrative can comfortably be taken for granted and doesn't need to be explicitly stated anymore. On a news chat show, any anti-Muslim pundit merely has to say Islam's horrific treatment of women to get their latest talking points across, because we already know from the Islamophobia narrative of the past 15 years that Islam is uniquely uncivil and cruel in its horrific treatment of women, QED. Reproducing the narrative like that is easy because it doesn't require any factual work, but merely reminders about what the narrative has already said. Conversely, rebutting the narrative requires an immense amount of knowledge, time, and energy, which most people simply do not have. It has become almost impossible for any individual to lay charge against the Islamophobia industry because the latter has gained such hegemonic dominance across society. On the far left, such as radicals, socialists, and anarchists, and the principled liberal left in newspapers and websites, you can read plenty of articles and essays which seek to debunk some of these core elements of the Islamophobia narrative. One article over here might go over the history of the Western elites using caricatures of Muslims in order to justify a colonial adventure, and one article over there might challenge the idea that Islam is uniquely oppressive to women by laying forth the history of other religions' sexism and the chapters of Islam's history that weren't oppressive to women at all. And with the topic of Islamism, another article can point out the historical links between Western imperialism and these groupings to show that political Islam is far from being ingrained into the Muslim character, but is instead a product of nefarious and deliberate imperial intervention into the Muslim world's polity. But these individual articles written by the left could never suffice to properly challenge the Islamophobia industry as a holistic institution. The volume of anti-Muslim propaganda being produced was just too great, and the articles were too small and too thinly detailed to even make a scratch upon the terrifying beast we're fighting. What has been desperately needed is for someone to assemble together an entire collection of anti-Islamophobia history history, arguments, and facts, to put them together and create a single body of work that can be used as a combat weapon against Islamophobia as an institution and political formation. In short, what has been needed is an anti-Islamophobia manifesto, an encyclopedia of information that the left can use in their struggle against anti-Muslim racism and Islamophobia more generally. Deepa Kumar's book, Islamophobia and the Politics of Empire, is exactly this manifesto that we've needed this past decade and a half. In terms of political necessity, this book is probably the most important one to be published since the beginning of the 21st century, which was around the time of the War on Terror being launched. Over the course of the book's 200 pages, Kumar covers just about every topic under the sun in terms of the politics and history, which comes to encompass the discourse concerning Muslims and human history, Islamophobia and Islamism. Every individual constituent element of the Islamophobia narrative is effectively counted within the chapters of the book. And then, when we consider Kumar's book as a whole, we have a device that can fight pound for pound against the Islamophobia industry. All things considered, everyone and anyone who is interested in fighting back against the anti-Muslim culture of mainstream Western politics needs to read this book. The book's great advantage is also its great disadvantage, its size. Being only 200 pages long, this makes it accessible and distributable to a much larger audience than if it were 400 or 600 or 800 pages. But as the size versus content balance would dictate, this means that the quality of information contained within the book is limited, sometimes providing little more than a brief overview of each constituent element. Often, Kumar touches on a topic for just a couple of pages before moving on to the next, as if she's in a rush to get everything done in time. The first couple of paragraphs introduce the Islamophobic claims about the topic, the next couple of paragraphs are spent debunking them, and that's basically it. Because she's working with such limited space, she can't afford to give any single topic the meat and context that it would deserve as a standalone subject. For example, there is the historical period of the Dark Ages, when Europe was an uncivilized, uncultural, feudal, agrarian, obscure backwater, while the Muslim world was advancing in leaps and bounds in terms of science, technology, philosophy, and medicine. Modern European civilization could only have come into existence via the Renaissance, thanks to the achievements of their Muslim neighbors. This topic is so rich and fascinating that to give it justice would require at least an entire chapter, but Kumar only gives 1.5 pages. Nuances and details are abandoned, replaced with overly generalized anti-racist and pro-Muslim rebuttals. Almost every topic is done in the same way, where the actual space given is just a brief summary, or a brief commentary, or a brief reference. This makes the book overall very useful for counter-arguments and propaganda, but completely useless for those readers desiring a comprehensive and fulfilling historical and academic experience. To properly bring forth all of the crucial details of every single topic would, of course, blow the book out to a massive tome, which is clearly not what Kumar was trying to do when writing this book. There are a few topics within the Islamophobia, Islamism discourse that Kumar doesn't address in her book. Since she had to cover such a swathe of topics across history and politics, she can be hardly criticized for missing one or two. I would suggest that perhaps these be included into a supplementary chapter when the book gets a second edition published, or be added into an already existing chapter in a revised edition. First, there's the veil question, how there is constant chatter about how governments in the West want to prevent Muslim women from wearing any religious headwear. Some Western countries have already banned some veils, while others are still talking about that possibility. Within this discussion, there is the dominant presumption that Muslim women aren't capable of making up their own minds about their clothing, that prohibitions against certain clothes will liberate them from religious servitude. The Islamophobia industry is using the left-wing value of supporting women's rights in order to further their agenda at persecuting and harassing the Muslim women who live in the West. Second, there's jihadism, a particular tendency within political Islam which is different to all its predecessors, embodied within the ideas of Osama bin Laden and the actions of Al-Qaeda. Most brands of Islamism have an obvious class basis in the downwardly mobile middle class and the lumpen proletariat, making them conservative and anti-progressive movements. But jihadism has a different class basis, has a different political program, has a different history, uses different strategies to carry out political activities, and employs different techniques for its propaganda. This movement should therefore be considered separate to mainstream forms of Islamism. Third, there's the Islamofascism argument, that because Islamism is a far-right political movement, it can be equated in all senses and terms and contexts with other far-right political movements across history, such as fascism and Nazism. Because the great noble war of modern history was World War II, when liberal democracy defeated fascism, it therefore provides justification for the United States to launch a comprehensive historical crusade against these far-right Islamist neo-fascists. That is the argument of taking the war on terror to a global historical stage, which is what we're trying to fight back against. And that's all the time we have for today. You've been listening to If History is Any Guide, the political and current affairs program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Alex Rondinan. Until next time, goodbye.